All right, rotation 2. Here is the remainder of chapter 1 of Duncan Dorfman. For 5 more weeks, though, it stayed in. Not only that, but he almost forgot about it. During that time, Duncan Dorfman became just one of 300 seventh graders in the Drilling Falls Middle School. Every morning, he walked through the halls in the overflowing crowds of kids, floating along like a leaf carried on a breeze. Then, after thumping his heavy backpack into locker number 299, he headed for class. No one knew him and no one cared. And even though that first day the homeroom teacher had said to the class, "Listen up, people, be sure to include our new students at lunchtime," no one did. There was another new kid that fall. His name was Andrew Tanizaki, and he had a face like a tired old man. People sometimes called Andrew the Chinaman, despite the fact that his grandparents were originally from Japan, and that Andrew and his parents were from New Jersey. Duncan Dorfman and Andrew Tanizaki sat together every day at lunch. No one else came to sit with them. It was just them, Duncan and the Chinaman, sitting across from each other in the cafeteria at 10:45 a.m. with their damp red trays. If only Duncan liked Andrew Tanizaki more, but this was what the conversation between them at the lunch table was like. "Do you play the video game Starpod Defenders Team Zero?" "No." "Well, I do, and I beat level 12. Only two other players in North America have done that. One is 5 years old. The other one has no hands. He was born that way, handless." "Oh." Then there was an awkward silence except for the chewing of food. The chewing went on and on. One day, after they sat uncomfortably like this for a while, Duncan finally stood up to get himself a glass of apple juice, and as he walked across the cafeteria, he felt something go slap against his back. He reached around but didn't feel anything, so he just got his juice and walked back to his seat. There was a distant laughter and the sounds of people shouting something, but Duncan paid no attention. As he reached his table, though, the shouting became harder to ignore. "Lunch meat!" people were calling out. "Hey, lunch meat!" After a few seconds, Duncan Dorfman realized that they were talking to him. He stood still, his face growing pink, but he had no idea of why they were saying this or what it meant. It was as if the kids at this school shouted strange random words at new kids in order to freak them out. Maybe in previous years they had shouted at other kids, "Hey, blowfish," or "Hey, monkey wrench." But then Andrew Tanizaki stood up and hurried over to Duncan. Duncan, you have lunch meat on your back," he whispered. "What?" "Lunch meat." Duncan reached around himself again, feeling all over the places on his back that he could reach. This time his hand found the edge of something cold and damp, and he pulled it off slowly and fearfully, as if taking off a band-aid. Someone had flung a piece of bologna at his back, and it had just stayed there, sticking to his yellow shirt. And now, like Andrew Tanizaki, aka the Chinaman, Duncan Dorfman had a nickname too: Lunch Meat. Just as the lunch meat had stuck to his shirt and the name stuck to Duncan. "Yo, lunch meat," kids said to him every day at school. Even a sixth-grade girl who had seemed to be a nice person called him that one day. Her face formed into a sneer. After a few days, kids stopped calling out to Duncan as much. They seemed to lose interest in this new boy who was becoming not so new anymore, but still the name was there. He had been branded lunch meat, and he eventually returned to his grim routine of mostly being ignored, except once in a while when someone called out the nickname for no particular reason. Life was joyless. That was the best word for it. Duncan slogged through the days, and at night he couldn't wait to go to sleep. He would lie in bed and listen to his mother and his great aunt have one of their whispery conversations about whatever private thing it was they talked about when he wasn't around, and then he would fall asleep. It might have gone on and on like this all year, but inside him, it was all getting to be too much. On a cold, slushy morning in October, 5 weeks after school began, sleet was pinging the windows outside the cafeteria, and someone across the room was calling out, "Hey, lunch meat!" And Andrew Chanizaki's jaw was biting down squeakily on a hot dog. All of it, the depressing weather, the nickname, the sounds, the loneliness, finally became unbearable. Duncan wondered if there was a way out. He could get on a bus and go somewhere, but where? He had no money, he had no father, he had no one and nothing other than a nice but overprotective migraine-getting mother who worked long hours at Thrifty Mike's. He thought about how much she had wanted him to hide his special ability from everyone. That was when it hit him. In order to have a decent future at Drilling Falls Middle School, he had to ignore what she wanted. Sorry, Mom, he said to himself, and then he sat up a little straighter and told Andrew Tanizaki, I have a power. The words were forbidden, but it was almost as if he hadn't said anything at all. Andrew barely looked up from his food. Yeah, right, he finally said. I do. Andrew took his pinky finger and reached deep into his mouth, trying to loosen a tiny piece of hot dog skin from between the tight clamps of his braces. Then he folded his arms across his chest and said to Duncan Dorfman, Show me.